Last one, hyperbolas or hyperbolas. It's hyperbola. All right, so hyperbola is the set of all points in a plane, the difference of whose distance from the foci is a positive constant. So kind of like an ellipse, but this time it's the difference between them, right? So if you have two foci, this is what a hyperbola ends up looking like. And basically what happens is if you have any point on this shape, right? When you have the difference of the bigger one to the smaller one, right? We see that the differences are now the same. All right. So, all that being said, hyperbola we get is, whoops, there we go. So, this time, instead of the addition for hyperbola, it's subtraction. So the x squared still is going to be over the a squared. The y squared is still going to be over the b squared when it comes to the horizontal, right? And then it'll look like this. So this time, instead of calling it the major axis, we call it the transverse axis. Don't ask me why. That's just mathematicians are dumb. They want to make everything confusing. So basically, the main axis that it's on, right, the transverse axis is the y-axis. For the vertical, a is still going to go under y, but remember the bigger number has to go in front. So we're going to write y squared over a squared minus x squared over b squared equals 1. So it is kind of the exact same formula, right? So remember for the ellipse, we could also have just rewritten it as y squared over a squared plus x squared over b squared is 1. That was another way we could have written those ellipses from the last lesson. All right. So again, the vertices are going to go on the y-axis this time. So the transverse is going to be the y-axis. All right, so this time, A is not bigger than B. A is just first. So don't let that trip you up. For the ellipse, A has to be bigger. For the hyperbola, A is just the first one. It does not have to be bigger, and a lot of times it's not going to be bigger. So the center, of course, is going to be 0. Vertices, just like with the ellipse, we think of plus or minus A on the transverse axis. Foci, once again, are going to be plus or minus C, this time on the transverse axis. And then we have some asymptotes. So actually, we need to include these asymptotes. And so what they are going to be, the asymptotes, so again, you can memorize it specifically if you want. Here is the way I do it, and I think it's probably the better way of doing it. So you just remember, right? It's y equals, well, it's going through the origin, right? So we're not going to have a plus b, so this is going to be mx plus b. And what do we always say m is? M is the slope, and slope is rise over run. So it's going to be plus or minus rise over run x. Where the rise is going to be A, the A or B, it's going to be the one under the Y. The run is going to be whatever number is under the X, specifically A or B. B or A. Right? So if we notice, in this case, right, for the hyperbola, or for the horizontal hyperbola, we're going to have y equals plus or minus, what's under y? B. So it's B over A, right? Rise over run. For the vertical one, it's going to be y equals plus or minus rise over run. Rise, that's the y value, so we have a over bx. If you just want to memorize those, that's fine too. But I just remember it as rise over run. Whatever's under x, divide by whatever's under, whatever's under y, divide by whatever's under x. And lastly, we still haven't talked about how to find c. So remember, this time for a hyperbola, which one's further away? Is it the foci or is it the vertice? So we actually see this case, right? The foci are further away. So since the foci are further away, and foci means c, right? And this time, we're going to have b squared is c squared minus a squared. So that's different, right? We switch these two because for the hyperbola, the foci are further away. So that one has to go first. For the ellipse, right, the vertices are further away. So that's why it's a squared minus c squared. All right. So graphing hyperbolas. So when you graph hyperbolas, first thing you want to do, as always, you want to make that equation equal to 1. We want to plot our plus or minus a on the transverse axis. And then we want to make sure to plot our asymptotes. That part's important. All right. Example 1. Sketch the graph and find the foci and asymptotes. So, again, we're going to divide everything by 36. So we get x squared over 4 minus y squared over 9 equals 1. So we need to figure out what is a, what's b, and what's c. So remember, this time, since it's a subtraction, a is not bigger, it's just first. So the first one is going to be a squared. So a is 2, which means the next one is b squared, which is 3. All right. So if we look at our asymptotes, that's the only other thing we need to worry about for graphing. We see it's going to be y equals plus or minus rise over run. So what's under y? It's b, right? So it's 3 over whatever's under x, which is the a, 2. That's our asymptotes. So if we're going to graph it, right? Remember, a is underneath x, so it's going to be a horizontal. All right, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So we see that for the asymptotes, we just go up 3 over 2, down 3 over 2, up 3 over 2, down 3 over 2. And so there we go. That's our graph. Last thing we got to find are the foci. So remember, for the hyperbola, the foci are further away, right? So that's going to be c squared minus a squared. So we said b squared was 9. C squared, or a squared was 4. So then that means c squared is 13, which means c is the square root of 13, because it's positive. So since it's on the x-axis, right, a is on the x-axis, so the foci are going to be plus or minus the square root of 13, 0. All right, let's look at the next one. So do the exact same thing. So this time it already equals 1, but this doesn't quite look the same that ours did. So we're going to have to do the same thing we did last time on the last lesson, right? Remember, everything's going to be over 1. And so basically we need to make our coefficients go underneath our denominator. Right, so we can say that's the same as y squared over 1/4 minus x squared over 1/2 equals 1. And again, if you just want to check, we get y squared divided by 1/4. That's the same as y squared times 4 over 1, which is 4y squared, right? So same thing. All right. So, as we always said, a is first for hyperbola, right? So, a is the square root of 1/4, which is 1/2. B is the square root of 1/2, which is 1 over square root of 2. So for the asymptote, remember it's rise over run. So underneath y, we have a, which is 1/2, over whatever's under x, which is 1 over square root of 2. So if we simplify that, we can do 1/2 divided by 1 over square root of 2, which is 1/2 times square root of 2 over 2. So we just get square root of 2 over 2. So y equals plus or minus square root of 2 over 2x. Those are our asymptotes. All right, so this time our y is, our a is on the y. So again, square root of 2 is just a little over 1. A little over 1 over to 2. A little over 1, negative 2. And then, so we just graph our asymptotes and then make our lines. Again, make sure, since they're asymptotes, your graph doesn't go past it. Good. Lastly, we want to find our foci. So remember, foci, the focus are further away. So we have c squared minus a squared. We said that a squared was 1/4, b squared was 1/2. So c squared is 3/4, which means c is the square root of 3 over 2. Since a is on the y-axis, we see that the foci are going to be with the y values. So 0 plus or minus square root of 3 over 2. All right, 2 more to go backwards, and then we're done with this lesson. So hyperbola is has vertices at plus or minus 3 and passes through this point. So let's find the equation, the foci, and the asymptotes. So we know that since this is the x, it has changed, right? This is going to be the x squared over a squared scenario. Since we know that a is 3, a squared is going to be 9. Now all we got to do is just find b. So since we have a point, right, that gives us an x value and a y value. So we get 5 squared over 9 minus 2 squared over b squared equals 1. So negative 4 over b squared equals 1 minus 25 over 9. So negative 4 over b squared is negative 16 over 9. If we cross multiply, we get negative 16b squared equals negative 36. So b squared is 9/4, which means that b is 3/2. Not that we needed it, right? Because we only needed b squared. Nope, not there. We plug it in. Well, that's annoying. Yeah, so we can just plug our b squared in back to our equation, right? So again, you can write it. Let's give ourselves more space. You can write it literally how it's written in our standard form. So x squared over 9 minus y squared over 9/4 equals 1. That is totally okay. An acceptable answer. If you want to move the 4 up, you can also write it as x squared over 9 minus 4y squared over 9 equals 1. That is another acceptable way to write it. So we found our equation. Good. Now let's find the foci and the asymptote. Well, the asymptote should be pretty easy, right? Remember, it is what is under y over what is under x. So y equals plus or minus b, which you said was half, or the square root of this, right? So 3/2 over, in this case, a. What's under x? 3. So to simplify, we see that the asymptotes are plus or minus 1/2 x. And then for the foci, right, that's going to be b squared is c squared minus a squared, because it's of course foci are further away. So we get 9/4 is c squared minus 9, which means that c squared, if you do the math, you can see that that's 45 over 4. So c is the square root of 45 over 2, which is also just 3 square root of 5 over 2. Since x came first, we know this is going to go on the x-axis. So it's plus or minus 3 square root of 5 over 2, comma 0. And that's our foci. Last problem, and then we'll be done with this lesson. So find the equation for the hyperbola that has its center at the origin, the vertices at 0 plus or minus 6, and the asymptotes at plus or minus 3x. So determine what the foci are. So since the y is changed, right, we know this is going to be the y squared over a squared scenario. And we already know what a is, right? A is 6, which means that's going to be 36. We also have the asymptotes. So for this one, since y is first, right, we see that it should be, the asymptote should equal a over b, right? Or in this case, it should equal plus or minus 6 over b, right? Whatever is under y divided by whatever is under x. Since it also equals plus or minus 3x, we can see that 3 is 6 over b, which of course means that b is 2. Which means b squared is 4. Plug it in. Y squared over 36 minus x squared over 4 is 1. And we got it. So last thing we gotta find is the foci. So it's b squared equals c squared minus a squared. B squared is 4. A squared is 36. So c squared is 40, which means that c is 2 square root of 10. Since y is first, it's going to go on the y-axis, which means that's going to be 0 plus or minus 2 square root of 10. And that's our foci. All right. Again, hopefully this was just a quick review. You should have already seen this in college algebra. But if you have any questions, you can always ask me.